Wyoming Territory, August 1883. The sun was sinking low behind the hills when Isaiah Archer rode into the edge of Calico Ridge, dust trailing behind his horse like smoke from a dying fire. He had been gone for 3 weeks driving cattle east, sleeping under stars and trying to forget the shape of her face. It had not worked. Every mile brought her back sharper in his mind. Now, as his boots hit the ground and he walked his horse past the last fence post, he saw her. She was sitting on the split-rail fence that ran along the edge of town, her hands folded in her lap, dark curls tucked under a faded blue bonnet. Fiona Bell. She looked up and stood when she saw him, and for a second neither of them moved, like the wind had gone still just for them. "You came back," she said. Isaiah took off his hat and nodded. "I said I would." They stood there in the orange-gold light, and he felt the old ache in his chest, the one he thought he buried years ago. She had been his neighbor once, back when his father's ranch still stood and her mother's pies were the talk of the ridge. That was before the fire, before her folks died, before she married a man who made her quiet and bruised. He stepped closer. "You all right?" she nodded, eyes steady. "I left him 2 nights ago." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "Where is he now?" "Gone, rode out drunk, said he would come back, but I do not think he will, and I do not care if he does." His breath came out hard. "You should not be out here alone." "I am not," she said. "Not anymore." Her voice was quiet, but it went through him like a shot. He looked at her hands, saw the raw skin at the knuckles, the way she held herself too still. She had been through something, but she had not broken, not Fiona. "I got a place out past Widow's Pass," he said. "Small cabin. Good wood stove. You can come with me. You," and he paused, "you still got your little girl." She looked away. "Yes, Kira, she is 6 now," he nodded, grounding himself. "You both can stay with me, safe." "You sure?" she asked. "I would not have said it if I wasn't." She looked at him a long time then, the kind of look that says, "I remember who you were and I see who you are now." Then she smiled and it did something to his ribs. "I packed our things," she said. "They are at the boarding house. I was just waiting." Isaiah's throat tightened. He reached out and helped her down from the fence. Her hand slipped into his like it belonged there. It felt right. They walked together to the boarding house just as the last slant of sunlight dipped behind the hills. Calico Ridge was quiet, the streets empty, the sky turning lavender. Fiona's daughter waited on the porch, swinging her legs, a small carpetbag beside her. "Hey there, little one," Isaiah said, tipping his hat. Kira looked up with wide, serious eyes. "Mama said a cowboy was coming." He crouched beside her. She was right. "Ready to go." She nodded and reached for Fiona's hand. Fiona picked up the bag and Isaiah took the other. They walked together, man, woman, and child, through the edge of the quiet town. The cabin was a half-day's ride, but they made it by moonlight. Isaiah rode with Kira in front of him, her head leaning back against his chest, asleep before they even crossed the ridge. Fiona followed behind on the borrowed mare. When they got there, he lit a lamp and showed them inside. It was small, one big room, a bed, a stove, and a cot he set up near the fireplace. "I will take the floor," he said. "You and Kira take the bed." Fiona touched his arm. "Isaiah, thank you." His eyes met hers. "You do not owe me anything." "I know," she said. "That is why it means something." He watched her tuck Kira into bed, brushing the child's hair back and kissing her temple. Then she stood by the window, arms folded, watching the stars. Isaiah rolled out his blanket by the fire. "You still like the stars?" She glanced down at him. "Always." "You remember that?" "I remember everything." She smiled, soft and tired. He looked at her silhouette in the lamplight, the way her shoulders loosened for the first time since he had seen her. He wanted to keep that look on her face. He had chased cattle across 4 states and never once felt as sure as he did right now. "You do not have to be afraid anymore," he said. I am not. Not with you. The fire cracked. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled once, then fell silent. Isaiah leaned back on his elbows, watching her. She stepped away from the window, came over and sat beside him on the floor. I used to dream about this, she said. He looked at her. What part? Being safe, sitting beside you. He did not say anything. He just reached for her hand again, and this time she held on tight. That night, with the stars overhead and the fire low, Isaiah Archer made a quiet promise. Whatever came next, he would walk beside her. Always. And this time he meant to keep it. The morning came pale and cool. A soft mist clung to the pine at the edge of Isaiah's land, and the grass held the night's dew like glass beads. He stepped out onto the porch with a tin cup of coffee, the steam curling against his face. Inside, the wood stove clinked as it settled, and Kira's quiet humming drifted through the door. Fiona joined him, her shawl drawn close around her shoulders. Her hair was braided back, still damp near the ends. She held a small bundle of mended linens under her arm. There's a washtub behind the cabin, she said. I found it this morning. Hope you don't mind. I don't, Isaiah said. Water's cold, though. I've known colder. A bird stirred in the branches above, and the wind moved through the needles with a low whisper. He watched the line of her jaw as her eyes followed something distant, maybe the ridge, maybe a thought. You always this quiet in the mornings? She asked. I speak when I've got something worth saying. She laughed, quick and low, then sat on the porch rail and opened the bundle in her lap. A shirt of his was folded inside, a tear at the shoulder neatly stitched. I figured it was yours, she said. Didn't think Kira tore her sleeves wrestling cattle. Isaiah looked down at it, then at her needlework. You sew like you were raised by a woman who knew its worth. I was raised by a woman who didn't have a choice. They didn't speak again for a while. The silence between them wasn't heavy, just full, like the kind that comes when two people have stopped pretending. Fiona stood and glanced toward the trees. I saw a few stumps near the slope. You clearing more land, started last spring. Soil's decent once you get past the first rock layer. Thought about planting oats. You'll need help turning that ground. I will. She met his eyes then, firm and steady. So will I. Isaiah didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. Her meaning was clear. She wasn't here to be hidden or pitied. She was here to take root. Later that day, he hitched the wagon and they rode into town for supplies. Kira sat between them, her boots knocking softly against the bench. She pointed out every crow and weathered fence post, asking questions about things she half understood, and neither of them corrected her. At the mercantile, Fiona selected flour, soap, a spool of thread, and a pair of second-hand boots for Kira. Isaiah added nails, a tin of lamp oil, and a new hand saw to the pile. Mrs. Ellsworth behind the counter didn't say much, but her gaze lingered longer than most would consider polite. On the way out, Fiona stopped at the post board near the door. There's a notice here, she said. Says the school teacher left. They're looking for someone to finish the term. Isaiah looked over her shoulder. You thinking about it? I taught a little before I married. Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands shifted on the paper. I could do it again. The walk back to the wagon was quiet. They loaded the supplies without speaking, but as Isaiah handed Kira into the seat and turned to help Fiona up, she looked at him. I don't want to be a guest, she said. Or a burden. You're not, you sure? I wouldn't have brought you here if I wasn't. She nodded once, then climbed up beside her daughter. He took the reins, but his hand lingered near hers on the seat board, just enough to let her feel it. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was sliding west, and the air had turned warm and dry. Fiona set to storing the supplies, and Kira wandered to the small patch of earth behind the cabin where Isaiah had tried and failed to grow tobacco last season. She's digging with a stick, Fiona said, watching from the doorway. She's got the right idea. You want a garden, you make one. She looked at him, then stepped outside. Maybe I'll show her where to start. Isaiah nodded. As the light stretched long, he stood beside the porch and split kindling, the rhythm steady and grounding. Behind him, Fiona knelt beside her daughter, hands in the dirt, sleeves rolled back past her elbows. She was laughing, not loud but real. He paused and leaned on the axe handle, just watching. This wasn't what he expected when he first came back. He thought maybe he'd ride into town, settle debts, and keep to himself. The quiet kind of life that didn't ask for more than a full larder and a sound roof. But now, watching Fiona press seeds into the soil beside her daughter, he felt something shift. Not sharp, not sudden, just sure. That evening, Fiona brought out a tin of beans and a heel of cornbread. They ate by lantern light, her shoulder against his, Kira curled up in a quilt on the floor. Isaiah listened to the wind against the shutters and the slow creak of the rocking chair beside the hearth. "You said you remembered everything," she said, voice low. "I did. Even the time I dared you to steal Mrs. Callahan's blackberry pie. She chased me with a broom clear to the river." Fiona laughed. "I still have the scar on my knee from falling in after you." He looked at her then, and the way her face softened in the lamplight made something in him ease, like a muscle unclenching after years held tight. "You never told me why you came back," she said. "I never stopped looking for a reason." She didn't speak after that, just leaned against him. Outside, the moon rose clean over the ridge. Inside, the quiet held steady. The last frost broke early that year. By mid-March, the snow had thinned to patches clinging to the north sides of rocks, and the dirt road into Calico Ridge turned soft under wagon wheels. Isaiah stood in the pasture, sleeves rolled to his elbows, splitting fence rails while Fiona walked the perimeter, her eyes sharp, counting posts that needed mending. "4 are leaning," she said, nudging a crooked post with her boot. "One's got rot at the base. You've got nails, but you'll need fresh pine." Isaiah rested the wedge against his thigh. "I'll hitch the team tomorrow, haul in what we need." She nodded and looked past him, toward the cabin where Kira knelt with a pair of worn gloves, turning over the thawed soil. A folded square of canvas marked the corner where she planned to plant onions. Fiona squinted. "She's got the rows too tight again. She'll figure it out. She's stubborn. She's yours." Fiona didn't answer, but her mouth curved just slightly at the corner. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. He walked with her back toward the cabin, boots sinking slightly in the softening ground. As they neared the porch, she slowed. "I've been thinking," she said, brushing a strand of wind-blown hair from her lip. "About the school." Isaiah leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed. "You decide." I spoke with Reverend Eckhart. "He says the board is still looking. He offered to put my name forward. I told him I'd consider it." "You worried what folks'll say?" "I'm not worried," she said. "But I've lived here long enough to know how memories stick." Isaiah glanced toward the barn, then back to her. "You're not the one with something to answer for. They won't see it that way. You'd be good at it." "I was good at it." She sat on the edge of the step, resting her forearms on her knees. "When I was 17, I taught 33 children in a church basement outside Cheyenne. Had to keep a boy named Harlan from setting fire to the reader's primer just because it had too many pages." Isaiah chuckled low. "What you do?" Took his matches and made him copy the entire thing top to bottom. "You still got that in you?" She looked up. "More than ever." He stepped down beside her, lowering himself to the ground. "Then take it. It's not just about me. It's 3 miles each way and Kira's still learning her numbers. I'd have to leave early. Come back late. She's not alone out here." Fiona turned to face him, her voice quiet but even. You'd watch her, I already do. She searched his face for something, maybe doubt, maybe hesitation. She found neither. I want her to see me do something worth doing, she said. Isaiah nodded once. Then do it. That evening, Fiona heated water and rinsed the dust from her hands. She tied her hair back tighter than usual, changed into her cleanest skirt, and rode into town to speak with the Reverend again. Isaiah stayed behind, mending the latch on the barn door while Kira sat nearby with a slate and chalk, sketching the outline of a mule that looked more like a loaf of bread. "Does it look like your horse?" she asked him. Isaiah glanced over. "He's not that round," she frowned. "I tried. You'll get it." When Fiona returned, the dusk had turned the hills violet. She dismounted slowly, her face unreadable until she stepped onto the porch. "They offered me the position," she said. "I start Monday." Isaiah stood from the rocker, brushing straw dust from his trousers. "You'll do more than fine. I'll need to leave before sunup. I'll ride out with you the first few mornings, until you find your rhythm." She hesitated. "That's a lot to ask. I'm offering." He didn't expect her to reach for his hand then, not with the sky still light and wind running through the pines, but she did, her fingers laced with his, steady and sure. "I never thought I'd start again," she said. "You didn't start," Isaiah said. "You kept going." That night after supper, Fiona sat by the fire and sorted through her old reader books, smoothing creased pages, setting aside the ones too worn to keep. Isaiah watched her from the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, arms crossed. "You ever think about teaching more than arithmetic and spelling?" She looked up. "What else is there? Maybe how to plant a row straight, how to patch a fence, how to stay when it'd be easier to run." Fiona's brow lifted. "You offering a curriculum, I'm offering a life." She set the book aside. "You think I haven't already chosen it?" He crossed the room then, slow but certain, and she stood to meet him. There was nothing hurried in the way he bent to kiss her. Just the deep quiet of something long understood and finally spoken. Kira stirred in her sleep by the hearth, and the fire threw soft light against the walls. Outside, the wind carried the scent of thawed earth and pine. Inside, two people stood close, the distance between them gone. The wind carried the scent of new grass and wet bark as Sunday gave way to dusk. Isaiah stood at the corner of the barn, oiling the hinges on the tack room door, while the earth softened beneath his boots. The last of the snowmelt had sunk in, and the air held that rare, fleeting warmth that came only in the brief weeks between thaw and planting. Fiona was inside, mending the strap on Kira's satchel, her fingers working with quiet precision. She hadn't spoken much since returning from her first week at the schoolhouse. It wasn't worry he could read that well enough, but something more measured, as if she were weighing a thing before naming it. He stepped inside when the light began to thin. Kira was asleep on the cot, one arm curled under her head, the other hanging loose, palm open to the ceiling. Fiona sat on the stool by the hearth, the leather strap now neatly stitched and resting in her lap. "Something happen?" he asked, voice low. She looked up slowly. "They put me in the back room." Isaiah leaned against the table. "Why?" "Because a man named Jasper Venn wrote the school board last winter, said no woman who left her husband should be in charge of other people's children." Isaiah's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I told them I wasn't there for his approval. I'm there to teach." He crossed the room and crouched beside her, eye level. "You want me to speak to someone?" "No," she said. "I want them to see me stay." She looked down at her hands. "There's a girl there, Ruby, she's 10. Doesn't speak much, but she listens. I gave her a slate of her own. She nearly cried." Isaiah reached for her hand, ran his thumb over the base of her fingers. "You giving her something no one else did." Fiona met his eyes. "So are you." He stood and pulled the kettle from the hook, poured water into the basin. You need more time for yourself. I'm not used to it, you'll learn. The next morning, Isaiah hitched the wagon before first light. Fiona stepped out dressed in the same wool skirt she'd worn all week, but her collar was pressed flat and her hair was braided tighter at the crown. She carried a cloth-wrapped parcel of biscuits and bacon, one edge darkened from the stove. "You'll be back by dusk?" she asked. "Before," he said. "I'll get the pine cut and be home in time to fix the latch on the smokehouse." She looked toward the cabin. "Kira'll want to feed the hens herself. She's been talking about it since last night. She's earned the right." Fiona hesitated, then reached up and adjusted the collar of his shirt with both hands, smoothing the fabric at his shoulders. "I left my past behind, but it's still following me." Isaiah leaned in, his voice steady. "It can follow all at once. It won't catch you." She nodded once, then climbed up beside him. He drove her to the schoolhouse without speaking, the road lined with cottonwood just beginning to bud. When they arrived, she climbed down and turned toward him. "I don't know what this is supposed to feel like," she said. "Maybe it's not supposed to feel like anything. Maybe it just is." She stepped closer, her hand on his forearm. "I want to keep building something. With you. You already are." She let go, walked through the gate, and disappeared into the clapboard building without looking back. Isaiah waited until she was inside before turning the team toward the ridge. That afternoon, while the sun moved slow across the sky, he felled 3 pines and hauled them back in sections. The work left his arms aching, but it settled his thoughts. By the time he reached the clearing near the cabin, Kira was sitting on the porch step, a book resting in her lap. "I read the first 2 pages, she said, standing as he stepped down. "Didn't get the long words. You'll get there." She followed him to the woodpile. "Mama says I might go early to the schoolhouse next week to help clean slates. You proud of her?" Kira nodded hard. "She tells the boys to sit down when they talk too loud." Isaiah stacked the pine clean and straight. "Sounds like she's got the right kind of voice." Kira grinned. "She does." As twilight settled, Fiona returned on foot, walking the last stretch of the road with her shawl trailing loose around her shoulders. Isaiah met her at the gate. She didn't speak, just reached for his hand and held it as they walked to the porch together. Inside, the fire was low and the air smelled of roasting beans. Kira had set out bowls and spread a cloth across the table that didn't quite reach both ends. Fiona looked around the room, then back at Isaiah. "I want to plant something more than onions this spring." He pulled out a chair for her. "What are you thinking? Corn, maybe squash," he nodded. "We'll clear the rows this weekend." She sat, folded her hands in her lap. "I don't want to just live here, I want to make this place ours." Isaiah reached across the table, took her hand in his. "You already have." The first sowing came with the April rains, light and steady, soaking the tilled rows behind the cabin until the soil packed firm around the corn seed. Isaiah worked with his sleeves rolled and his hat low, the brim slick with water. Fiona walked beside him, pressing seed into the wet earth, her skirt hem dark with mud. Neither of them said much. It was the sort of work that lived in the bones, quiet and sure. By the time the last row was finished, Kira had fallen asleep on the porch, wrapped in a blanket with her doll tucked beneath her chin. Fiona brushed the dirt from her palms and stood, watching Isaiah tamp down the final row with the side of his boot. "You've got a steady hand for planting," she said. "I was raised to make things last." Fiona leaned against the rail, her shoulders damp from the mist. "Sometimes I forget what it's like to build something and not have to look over my shoulder." He set the hoe down and crossed to her, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "You don't have to anymore." She looked up at him, rain catching in her lashes. "I know. It just takes time to believe it." That night, she cooked with onions and salted pork, and Isaiah brought in kindling dry enough to light. They ate together at the table, Kira still curled under her quilt, her face peaceful in sleep. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and rosemary, and the only sound for a time was the soft scrape of spoons against tin. When Fiona stood to clear the dishes, Isaiah took the basin from her hands. "You sit. I've got it." She hesitated, then lowered herself into the rocker by the fire. "I don't think I've ever been told that before." He poured the wash water and said nothing, only glanced her way with a look that held more than words. Later, as the fire burned low, she folded her sewing and moved to the window. Outside, lightning flickered far off over the ridge, casting pale flashes over the pasture. "I used to think storms were warnings," she said quietly. Isaiah set his cup down. "And now I think they're just part of the weather." He rose and stepped behind her, his hand resting gently at her waist. "I want to ask you something," he said. She turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "All right." He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a narrow silver band threaded through with a strip of braided horsehair. "My mother made this for my father before their second winter together. He gave it to me the year I turned 21. I always thought I'd know when I found the right time to pass it on." Fiona's hand trembled slightly as he placed the ring in her palm. "I don't want to just share a roof with you," he said. "I want to share the years, the dry ones and the good ones. I want you to marry me." She looked down at the ring, then up at him, something deep and steady settling in her gaze. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure." She closed her fingers around the ring and stepped into him, her arms sliding around his waist. "Then yes." He didn't kiss her right away. He just held her, his chin resting against her hair, the warmth between them stronger than any fire. They married in late May, under a cottonwood tree behind the cabin, with Reverend Eckhart standing in the grass and Kira clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. Fiona wore a cream-colored dress with sleeves she'd hemmed herself. Isaiah wore a clean shirt and his best boots. There were no guests beyond the wind and the birds and the quiet hum of bees in the tall grass, but it was enough. After the vows, Kira ran to them, arms wide, and Isaiah lifted her easily, one arm around her and the other around Fiona. The cabin behind them stood solid and warm, and the fields beyond had begun to sprout pale green shoots from the soil they'd sown together. That summer, the school board extended Fiona's position for the full term. She rode in every morning and returned each evening to Isaiah and Kira, her skirts dusted with chalk and her eyes bright with stories. Isaiah continued to tend the land, adding a pen for goats and helping Kira build a small bench beneath the tree where they'd married. They rarely spoke of what had come before. It didn't need naming. Their life was now a rhythm of work and rest, of shared glances across the table, of hands brushing as they reached for the same bowl of berries. They slept close, and when storms rolled over the ridge in late summer, they faced them together dry and warm beneath the roof they'd mended by hand. When the harvest came, it was modest, enough to fill their shelves and trade a few sacks in town. Fiona made pies with the squash, and Isaiah salted the meat for winter. Kira read aloud in the evenings, her voice growing stronger with each page one night. As the wind turned cooler and the leaves began to shift to gold, Fiona stood in the doorway, watching the sun sink behind the fields. Isaiah came to stand beside her, his arms slipping around her shoulders. "I used to think happiness was something that happened far away," she said. "Something that belonged to people who hadn't been through much. What changed your mind? You did." He kissed her temple and they stood watching the last light fade, the sky streaked with violet and rose. Inside, the fire waited. So did Kira's quiet laughter and the warmth of the home they'd made. And outside, the land that would carry them through every season, side by side. They never left Calico Ridge. They didn't need to. Everything they wanted grew right where they'd chosen to stay woven into the soil, the wood, and the quiet, steady love they built together.